All right, welcome to our fifth West Oakland Link meeting. This will be the last meeting of 2023. Really excited that folks are able to join us and really excited to see what the community's feedback and voice, what it is starting to look like, right? And we're still early on and still very excited to see. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of where we are in our schedule, so this is placemaking, design, and history. What we'll see is essentially a culmination of all of the last few meetings, all of that feedback, and we'll see what that looks like in terms of amenities and also where it still needs to grow and where it still needs to shift. Meeting expectations, right? We ask that everyone communicates with respect, right? And be mindful of how much space you're taking while engaging those who haven't spoken. Respect time agreements and stay on topic in order to achieve our meeting goals. We ask that everyone actively listen with an open mind and respect multiple points of view, right? Part of being an active listener is more than just waiting for your turn to talk. We assume good faith, right, in giving and receiving feedback, criticism, and questions. Right, this truly is a team sport. And we check for diversity gaps, right? Who is missing and propose solutions for it. All right. So in terms of, right, who's presenting tonight, right? We have Gavin. We have, do you want to say anything, Gavin? Quick few words, favorite hobbies, anything?
No, thank you. Gavin
right.
Laurie from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Bay Area Toll Authority. Thanks.
Great. And I'm Nicole Marino Choi. I am the Senior Project Manager for West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and also a resident and a parent in West Oakland. Matt, do you want me to introduce you? You want to?
Oh, sure. Hi, everybody. Matt Koval. I'm an associate principal here at Perkins and Will, and we are partnered on this project to help collaborate. We're both an architecture and an urban design company, and we're working with TU Island and MTC and Einwaller. Cool. Deshadra?
Hi everyone, my name is Deshadra Pudar. I'm an urban designer at Perkins and Will, and excited to share what we have worked on in this meeting.
And I'm Sarah Keel. I'm a landscape architect with a firm in Oakland called Einwheeler Keel, and really excited to be here for this meeting as well. Gio?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gio Main. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a landscape designer with Sarah and Fiwa. I'll pass it over to Fiwa.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Fiwa with Einwheeler Keel Landscape Architects. Happy to be here with you all today.
Thanks everyone for those introductions. So where is the West Oakland link on a map, right? So essentially it starts right at West Grand and Mandela Parkway, okay? And will take us all the way to the Bay Trail, right? In terms of a more regional, right, lens, it'll eventually connect West Oakland to Treasure Island, right? So simply having that option to not drive and more importantly to not pay BART, right, will be really wonderful and exciting, and to have access to 200 acres of green space could be a game changer. So really excited to see where that takes us. What is West Oakland Link? At its heart, it's a trail project, right? And essentially what that means, right, is that it's 1.1 miles of protected, right, separated and elevated multi-use pathways, and what that looks like is pedestrians, right? Casual walkers, casual joggers, bicyclists, and just anyone who wants to go out and not have to worry about the impact of car traffic and truck traffic, right? Which is something that we've had to contend with in West Oakland for decades. It'll eventually connect with the Grand Avenue bike lane, which will get us all the way down to downtown and to the Mandela Parkway, right, which is another beautiful green space that we're fortunate to have. And it's also an opportunity, right, for community input around what landscaping should look like and what actual amenities are that we would like to see, right, for the next 50, 60, 70 years plus. In terms of West Oakland Link, I do want to note that this project is essentially being funded by federal dollars, right? And in an ideal world, right, we would have access to this money for anything that the community needs. Unfortunately, right, it's earmarked, right, for transportation. And if the money did not go to this project, to West Oakland Link, it would easily go to somewhere just as cool like Kansas City or, fill in the blank. So this is an opportunity for us to make sure that this is more than an infrastructure project and that we actually are designing at the margins and designing for our community values, right? In terms of what we've heard, right, and this is just a snapshot, right? What we've heard is folks really, really want a safe, accessible, and we want to make sure that environmental exposure is reduced, right? We don't want to have the same levels or increase our exposure levels, right? Especially to diesel emissions. We want to be able to accommodate multiple modes of transportation or transit, right? And make sure that this space is accessible to all. Equitable access, right? And engagement of local residents, right, is a top priority. Ongoing maintenance, right, is a key part of keeping the space accessible to all, right? If we know that if things are in disrepair or disarray, they no longer become accessible to the community, which means that it's no longer a public space and it's no longer an asset, right? And safety is extremely important. And we've heard the need for signage, right? And adequate and ample lighting, right? To make sure that the path is usable and safe and welcoming. What are we doing tonight? Well, we're gonna start the conversation about, right, local site history, right? And again, that's just a snippet of West Oakland's rich history. So I do want to note that. We're gonna look at just different transportation histories, right? Social, ecological, and how they've impacted the area. And again, I will note that that's just a snippet, right? Because of how diverse and rich and complicated, right, West Oakland's history is. We're going to review and discuss what we heard and how that's shaping, right, the composition of the structure and the ground, right? And again, we're working towards 35% design. And we're going to discuss and document, right, community impact, community insight, community feedback, and community questions, right, to make sure that nothing goes unanswered, right, in this process. Go for it, sir.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you. I really appreciate the chance to be here tonight. And I'm going to kick us off by, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. By saying the history that we know of transportation projects in particular, writ large, highways, some train projects, so on and so forth, have negatively impacted people who live in the neighborhood. And that because this is also a transportation project, we wanted to state our intention and goal that the transportation project we're working on is both to make a regional connection and to make resiliency at a regional scale, but also to be a very positive amenity that's rooted in the local neighborhood. And we know that it's going to take a lot of work and that it's important to do it well, but we wanted to be transparent about that at the beginning of this. Next slide. So I've heard this project presented at different times, and sometimes it's about connecting West Oakland to the Bay Bridge or connecting West Oakland to San Francisco. And I think it's also important to think of it the other way around, of connecting people who are on the Bay Trail to West Oakland, and to sort of showcase all of the amazing public and semi-public spaces that are available that people might want to come and see. To sort of introduce people to the history, to the amazing art, food, etc. And so we're thinking about it in both directions. It's sort of the point of this slide. And we know there are a lot of things here to be celebrated that should show up on our maps. Next slide. Another aspect of the history here that's important to the team is the relationship to larger ecologies. And so in the sort of order of the natural world, this was a place that was a very watery place. This was really part of the bay originally, and that's the extent of the entire link. And so being able to connect to the water and have a relationship to the natural world is really important. And we're thinking about that as one of the things that we want to do with the project. Next slide. We've also been looking in more detail at that history of transportation. And you can see here different train lines in the Key system, the 16th Street Station. You can also see the various highways constructed that sort of make a loop around West Oakland, kind of cut it off, and the way that the link bike path is sort of crossing over some of that, some of those ways in which the neighborhood has been cut off. Next slide. And then in terms of biking as a mode of transportation, which we think is really important for equity, this project, in my mind, you know, has really grown out of the New Bay Bridge. And the little map that you see on the right with the red, blue, and yellow shows the bike paths that were built as part of the Bay Bridge. And there wasn't a bike path connection made in that original effort towards West Oakland and towards Mandela Parkway. And this is really a project that's coming in and making that right and making sure that there is a connection to Oakland and equal access and safe access to get on to the waterfront trails at the Bay. Next slide. And so as a landscape architect, I'm often thinking about history and story, but we're also thinking about that in a way that's spatial. And so on the right-hand side of this graphic is Mandela Parkway in space. And on the left-hand side is the existing Bay Bridge bike trail. And all of these other lines are things that have happened that actually occur literally on that line. There's a redlining boundary, there's railways, there's the 880 freeway, there's the historic shoreline at different periods, and so on and so forth. And we're really interested in the question of, are these important stories to tell along this line? And what are the other important stories to tell upon this line? And we've pulled a few examples tonight to kind of provoke a discussion, but it's important for me to say at the outset, this is incomplete. And it's really a way to kind of start a conversation with you all rather than the final version of it or even anywhere near a complete history. Next slide. So the first one I wanted to say is that this is a place where Indigenous people lived for a really long time and still live today. And so knowing that that historic shoreline, which is close to Mandela Parkway, was a place that people inhabited and you know, used in the ancient times and still used today, I think could be a great story to tell. I'm particularly interested in showcasing language and showing ways that language is contemporary, and that could be something we could do. And this is an example of the Cafe Ohlone soundposts that have some of the Chochenyo language. Next slide. Another story that I think could be interesting to tell would be to show the redlining boundary on the trail itself. And there's really great work being done in New York City to try to break down the mental map of redlining, which still persists in perceptions of things, and have people move about. So we could imagine that there could be maps that sort of bring that information together as one kind of storytelling. Next slide. Another history that I think many of you are familiar with is the Oakland's Pullman Porters, which was a huge important community and labor advocacy group in West Oakland. This Pullman Porter stool on the right could be an incredible element to include in the project, either large scale, so it became a shade structure, or as a small element. But it could be interesting to show where that is on the actual bike trail and to tell that story. Next slide. And then lastly, the Cypress Freeway itself, both the decision to construct it there within a neighborhood and to disrupt the neighborhood, to connect people outside of the neighborhood, also the earthquake where it falls. And this often ends with the image of the reconstructed road, but I've added these images of the Huey Newton sculpture installation because I think the real celebration of this is that this has become again a community space, and there could be opportunities for additional heroes and monuments of important people to be added and sort of re-celebrate Mandela Parkway in that way as a community space. Next slide. So storytelling I love, and it can be done in a million different ways, but just to kind of name a few here, there are monumental things you can do, which generally means much larger than a person. You can't miss it from far away, and powerful. There are things you can do that are processional, that to understand them, you have to actually go on the path and kind of pick up all of the pieces. There are things that are immersive and you get inside of, or they're interactive and playful. There are things you can do with planting that tell stories. And there's also a category that we were debating, is it educational or informative, but there's ways to give information in a more didactic and sort of teaching way. Next slide. Two places that I think are really important to think about and we really need input on are the trailheads themselves, because I think that sets the identity for the trail. And this part of the trail will someday have a name, and I'd be really interested to know what name is a good name, or what names should be considered. Next slide. And trailheads can be a lot of different things. They can be a gateway that you go underneath. They could be a monumental structure. They could be a poem that starts at a certain point. They can be done in different ways. And so discussing those two ends and what should they be, what characters should they have, will be important. Next slide. The other thing I want to talk about, and I always like to remind people in public meetings, is, you know, I believe we've got 34 people here. Some of us are here for work. There's a whole lot of people not in the room. And it's important to think about things we can do in the project that would make the project feel more inclusive, and particularly with functional elements like seating or bike racks. So this is a tactile map for the blind, to make things that actually extend the project and reach out and feel like they're very welcoming and inclusive. And that's something that we're thinking about in the storytelling, and what are the stories that make the project feel the most public and the most civic. Next slide. And so the question, and we will get into this discussion, but it is the kind of thing you could spend a lot longer on. So I want to take a moment to remind people that we have the survey, and additional input can be put into the survey as well as given to WOA. So don't feel limited by the time that we have today. There is additional time if we need it to really give this subject its due. But the discussion is, what should show up on the trail as stories to be told? And we've listed a few things that have spatial relevance, but obviously there could be others. And particularly, are there stories that would make the trail feel more inviting and more welcoming to people who might have found regional projects less inclusive or find them not to be very inclusive for them? And so I'm gonna do two things. One, I'm going to apologize that somewhere in the middle of this conversation, I'm going to see a play called Bull Rusher, and I've been looking forward to it for 6 months. So if someone's going to follow up with the notes for me for that when I bow out, and I'm going to pass it to Will up to lead this conversation. And I really appreciate everyone's thoughtful input and hope to continue this conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's start with what should actually show up right on the trail in terms of local history, right? What's important? We see a few points of history, right, named here. What's missing? What would you guys like to see?
I see in the chat Oakland Army Base as a history. I think that's an answer.
Oh yes, Bill. Happy you're here, by the way. Yeah, the Oakland Army Base, right, and the significance it had in terms of migration, employment, so forth. Thank you. So we have Oakland Army Base. Right, I see that's missing from this timeline. What other stories? And remember, this right here is not comprehensive, right? So everything's important and useful. So please share. Let's see, I see Hannah's comment, some reference to the Black Panther and Black Power movement, history of West Oakland. Agreed, thank you. Are there stories that would make the trail more inviting, right? And just feel safer and more inclusive?
I'm also wondering if there are, if folks have any thoughts on examples that they've experienced of locations or outdoor spaces where they have actually encountered some storytelling or historical context that felt relevant for them. I know there are a number of, nature trails and outdoor spaces that often have interpretive signage and stuff like that. I'm thinking of some of the shipbuilding structures and history that's shared in Richmond, for example. I'm wondering if folks have any thoughts on or examples that they've experienced that have stood out to them.
Thanks, Jess, for that framing.
And we are starting to get a number of comments in the chat, which I think are great.
Yeah, I'm seeing Bill here, port history of containers, right? I see an artist community in West Oakland, right? That could be shared. See, as well as those who have lived on the land before Oakland was established, right? And animal plant life prior to development. Bay Bridge, old and new. 7th Street, right, for its jazz history. Right, Harlem of the West. And then it might be interesting to hear, right, how the project is documenting local stories in West and North Oakland. Okay. Environmental justice, of course. Initiatives in the city of Oakland, it's very equitable climate action plan, information about community members who helped in the rescue of people in the Loma Prieta quake, Highline in New York. I mean, That is the dream. We have natural history. These are all wonderful. Any other stories, like history or just pleasant trails that you've experienced that we could, right, bring to life for the West Oakland link? And these are all just wonderful, wonderful things that you guys have shared.
Yeah, thank you. These are really great suggestions, and I feel like we could go deep into many of them. But I like now remind people we have more time, and you can put things in the survey, and they'll still get to us. Because I find in big topics, sometimes it's like the next day I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm like, oh, I just thought of something. Please do that tomorrow. Use the QR code and send more things.
All right, to Sarah's point, if something comes to you at any point, right, please include that in the survey or email myself, right, about it. Everything's important. So thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask, before we move on, I'm some of these comments and notes, sorry, I'll turn my camera on. Some of these comments and notes are really interesting to me, and I'm wondering if we might dig into a couple of them. So for example, Violet mentions information about community members who helped in the rescues of people trapped by the earthquake, and also men and women who helped to build the New Bay Bridge. And then Ryan talks about the natural history, like the original shoreline. And I'm wondering sort of how people feel about this. There's this sort of contrast between very personal, singular kind of individual narratives and storytelling around people and that have occupied these spaces, as well as this larger big picture kind of look at the ecology and natural history of the space. Do folks have opinions or thoughts on sort of those two juxtapositions and sort of how you think about those things when you're out, in recreational areas or when you're kind of even just commuting, what kind of, how does that play a role in those experiences for you?
Well, if I may speak, I thought about it because someone mentioned about in the Richmond area, there's something about the women working over there. It was a comment made that made me think about who built these places, even though it was a natural landscape before the buildings and these structures got built, but who helped to build them? They just didn't appear out of the thin air. So it was a lot of work and sweat and thinking, sacrifice, and you name it, went into helping to make these roadways possible.
So kind of amplifying these kind of otherwise hidden histories.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to read a couple of these out loud as they're coming in. Personally, I prefer to see us honor average, non-famous people who did great things rather than all the sorry, my feed is going too fast. Rather than, sorry, all these non-famous people who did great things rather than all the well-known historical figures. Yeah, so really elevating voices and people that maybe don't typically get the spotlight. Equally important to mention is that the Ohlone history and freeway collapse have already been told at Bay Street Mall and in Mandela Parkway, respectively. Yes to amplifying hidden histories. I think the story, you guys are fast. I think the story of Pullman porters is way undertold. It could be a huge part of the story this trail tells. Yeah, that's an interesting one to me too. I agree. I think, not a lot of folks realize that that history and understand the sort of long reach of that history on even today's even today's labor movement. It would be interesting to show how people crossed the bay before the bridge was built. Yep, I love the idea of hidden histories that can encompass both personal stories and natural history, fun facts potentially. Sorry if I missed this, but how would these stories be presented or communicated? Well, that's a great question, and we'll get into that in the rest of this meeting.
And Ryan, we are trying to figure that out, right? There are so many ways to tell all of these stories, and what does that look like for West Oakland residents? All right, I'm gonna move us into our next portion. Thanks everyone for this.
Hi, everyone. First of all, it's an honor to work with and for a community that's so engaged. If the chat box is like a great example for that. And here we will take you on a journey of how this structure, the path itself, can actually tell these stories, provide comfort and convenience to the community. So we looked at the entire path and we've gathered a lot of valuable feedback over the course of all these community meetings. And we went to the drawing board and we looked at how this path itself is an amenity, but also this path can be spread out with various amenities that the community wanted. Things like rest, art, signage, storytelling, exposure screening, utilities like lighting, and also exposure screening like sound barriers or various other things. And we highlighted some of these notes that we identified with the community. And I would like to highlight that this is a walking and biking path. So one of the biggest reasons why we have placed these nodes at these distances, which are 0.25 miles apart, is it's a natural distance when a person who's walking would like a rest stop. So next slide, please. We looked into each of these nodes and we put down the things we heard from the community that we would like to have. For example, on the Bay Trail, people wanted some sort of signage and wayfinding, which makes it very clear for people to get on the path. And some people also wanted lighting for safety under all of this great infrastructure, which this path will be traversing. People wanted beauty in the form of public art or interpretation. They also wanted a rest stop after making the climb onto the path. Next slide, please. Then at the Maritime Institute, people express a desire for, again, another rest stop when they get on the path through the ramp. And we will, there would be some sort of wayfinding again, because there is another access point to the path, but also some sort of a bike rack and some further interpretation to talk about that neighborhood that you are traversing through. Next slide. And then at this very interesting area where the path turns into a loop and comes at grade under frontage road is where people had a desire for sound barriers and wind barriers to protect from the heavy traffic next to the path, but also rest points and more art lighting for public art and signage, so that it's easy to traverse this rather complicated movement. How do we make it more accessible for people? Next slide, please. And then we looked at the structure itself and what are the various elements that can be useful in different ways and what are the key considerations we need to keep in mind. So the first is the surface that people would walk and bike on. So the key considerations would be the experience of biking or walking on it, durability of the material, sustainability of the material, and the color and finish, because we heard the community wants it to stand out. Next slide. The next element would be railing. Railing could play an important role in how simple and elegant this structure looks. Considerations would be safety for pedestrians and cyclists, accessibility, and again, durability, sustainability, and storytelling. Next slide. And then this path wouldn't be the same all throughout. It would change based on its specific requirements to make the journey more comfortable. So in this image, we see how the path has a sound or wind barrier on one side. And it's very crucial for the community to be protected, to feel protected and comfortable. This sound or wind barrier could also be very beautiful and be a tool for storytelling or public art. Next slide. And then we talk about lighting. Lighting is crucial for safety. If you're on the path, lighting is important for wayfinding, accessibility, but it's also important to use the structure to light the underbelly because it will provide greater safety. A lot of the times, the path traverses through these heavy infrastructure under the freeways, and how can lighting be used to provide greater safety and beauty? Next slide. And then the path expands at these nodes or moments when the path would be a wider structure. Next slide. And at these moments of pause, we might have seating for rest. Next slide. And additional items like maps or signage for easier wayfinding and storytelling, interpretation of what you're looking at, where you're traversing through, the stories that we have identified today in this meeting. Next slide. As well as some emergency requirements like a call box, emergency call box, to feel safe that if need be, we can access an emergency call box, we can drop off the bike, and we can be flexible. Next slide. And also shade. So a lot of these times we will be traversing these barren sort of landscapes, and shade would be great because it is a rest point. You want shade in the heat. So next slide. And then there are two other elements which would be slightly different from the path itself, which is one is the loop, wherein the path is looping gradually at an accessible slope to get onto the level that it is. So these are a few examples of ways it can be done. Next slide. And there would be a stair as well to provide an alternate option on top of the loop. And here are a few examples. Next slide. So our key questions are, please help us identify the elements of the structure itself that needs to be added, modified, or removed. Is there any particular element you believe that needs more attention than the others? And also help us identify, have we covered the locations for the appropriate exposure screening, like sound barriers, wind barriers, or shade? If not, please recommend where is it needed more, where can we do away with it? And also, how do we make the stairs more accessible and welcoming and safe?
All right, I'm going to lead us through this. I know that we've seen lots of designs, right, and lots of amenities and just lots of things. So if you need clarification around anything, please ask. I'm going to actually start from the bottom, right, since we just saw the stairs. What are folks thinking when they see stairs, and how can we ensure that the stairs are more accessible and welcoming, right? We want and need, right, them to feel safe so that people can use them. How can we do that?
Maybe we could also open up if there's any kind of general comment or questions about these elements that we're seeing too, if there's any clarification. So.
Maybe we can go back a couple of slides to just ground folks in what they're seeing. There we go.
So Alexis is asking about greenery and didn't see that cited as one of the elements specifically.
Yeah, and that's, Alexis, thank you for highlighting that. And greenery is, that vegetative buffer is extremely important and will be discussed in the next set of slides. So thank you for that. And what Deshandra covered is specifically the elevated path. Some key challenges of an elevated path is can't really have too much greenery, if any, right? And that is something that we will have to work with or work against, depending on how you look at it, right?
There's also another question that came in by Ryan. Is there a design strategy for preventing graffiti? Which is, I think, a great question. Definitely something that we're considering within the project. So a lot of what we will end up having to kind of build as the base project itself will have to meet kind of Caltrans standards, and they do have a number of standards around graffiti, but this would be particularly important if we did put anything like, you know, screens that were clear to kind of prevent noise or you know, kind of pollution from coming directly on the path. So it's definitely a great comment and something we'll have to continue to think about. There is kind of base standards, but definitely something we want to pay attention to.
Gavin, I see a question from Alverdia, and she's asking about accessibility for disabled persons using walkers and wheelchairs and canes.
Yeah, so you know, we follow all the kind of ADA standards in building the path and kind of designing it to make sure the grades are there and it's not too steep and there's resting areas. But we do understand that that's not enough to go into, and that there is other kind of requirements. So actually, we're working with the West Oakland Environmental Indicator Project to really try and set up some more focus meetings on with the, you know, with people who have accessibility challenges, because we know there's kind of finer elements that we have to get right on this. And so we really are looking for any feedback, and if it's something you're, you know, particularly concerned about, please let us know, and we would love to have you at those meetings, because we would do want to make sure this is accessible to everyone. And really, you know, right now we're kind of at the bigger level and making sure every ramp is going to be accessible. There's a much smaller design detail level that we do need to get into.
There's a question here about whether or not the West Oakland link would have ramps. So when would we have ramps versus stairs?
So the answer is it would always be ramps. The stairs, the only stair that we're looking at adding right now would just be a little quicker to get up compared to the ramp that would be there. So it's so the stairs are only kind of an add-on and actually not even quite necessary, but we did think that it would be useful to have a little bit of a quicker way if you're coming from Wood Street to just pop up the stairs and be on the structure itself.
Great. Alexis had a question about whether or not the stairs would have a bicycle entry, I guess, incorporated, just to make it easier for folks coming up and down versus, you know, folks without bikes.
I don't actually think so, because I think because it's right beside the ramp, I think the expectation would be is that people would use the ramp, and because it isn't, you know, it's kind of would just be much easier to go up on the ramp than it would be there. But you know, definitely, I mean, we're only looking at one staircase right now, but if we did for some fire exit or whatever reason have to add others or something like that, we would definitely consider that and make sure there is that ability.
Thank you. In terms of, we have options for sound barriers, right? We know this path is parallel to lots of traffic, right? A freeway, frontage road. Where would it make the most sense to have exposure screenings, right? So sound barriers, wind barriers, and shade. Would love any thoughts. Desharger, thank you for taking us back there. Gavin, how much of the actual link is next to vehicles or trucks in terms of the 1.1 miles?
Yeah, I mean, it's most of it is very close.
Okay.
There's a difference between, there is at least one section that is right, or there's two sections. When you go up Grand, there'll be a path towards frontage road that will be right beside. We'll just have a barrier between the road and the path. And then at least during this first iteration, there'll be, when you go over the railway, and we'll talk about that hopefully a little bit later, but you'll also be right next to the freeway. The rest of the time we do move it out of, away from the freeway. So there is that space that allows airflows and some of the dispersal of air pollution and a little bit less noise, but it's all very close, to the freeway. As you can see here, or not to the freeway, to Grand and the adjacent freeways. So yeah, as you can see here, it just really does follow right beside Grand Avenue itself.
Alverdia is asking that we consider incorporating some type of lift for mobility devices. And for full transparency, Alverdia, we are asking for an elevator box, and in its current stage of this project, there's no money for an actual elevator, but the fact that an elevator box will be designed gives us, right, the community, the chance to demand it in the future and it already be built in. Gavin, did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, so really with the kind of elevators, I mean, elevators are a great solution for getting people up and down. The plan is that we want to design so if in the future they could be added, but they won't be in this iteration. It's not just the cost, it's also just really a lot of organizations aren't built to build and manage elevators, and so that actually is a bigger problem that has to be figured out kind of on a regional level, how to kind of manage public elevators. So we would love for it, and we think that there would be a lot of places where it'd be beneficial. It's just not something that's possible in a project, in the Bay Area right now.
Okay.
And
Looks like we have another question from Alexis.
Asking about the sound barrier and placements and stuff. And this is something that it's still kind of being looked at exactly where it was. I think that the reason you're seeing it right there in that spot is because of the way the highways are there and the way, some of that sound is going to bounce off. So you're going to go from a highway that you're on the same level as, and that's going to go down. And then there's a highway above. So there's kind of these bouncing off things. So this is an area where we think is particularly loud. But definitely, I mean, we have to kind of figure out, look at kind of the costs of them and how we maintain them and stuff. But there's a lot of places that could benefit from a sound barrier. Problem is we also want it to be visible, right? We want to, there's a feeling of safety when you're out there, and you can be seen by cars and stuff. So we also want to make sure they're visible. So it's really trying to find, is there a solution that can make sure everyone's still visible, but also that sound barrier, and make it work. So it definitely, I think it's good feedback if people kind of want sound barriers everywhere. But but this is just kind of was looking at some of the areas we think would be most noisy.
Okay, anything else? Let's see, approximately how far are waste treatment facilities? So unfortunately, right, I live right here, and we have EB Mud, right, was a neighbor. We have, to take a little bit further, we have Cass, right, in the neighborhood. We have CWS. We have concrete facilities. Am I missing any other big industry names? Apologies if I am. So my guess is, EB Mud will be right below, or definitely visible, right, from the link, and Cass, right, CWS are probably less than half a mile, right? And if you're on Mandela Parkway, a lot closer. So until we get these types of businesses out, right, that's a challenge, right? Just having industry that has historically been allowed and zoned here. As neighbors, right, this is where we are. Make sure I'm not missing any other questions here. Are there plans to mitigate the user's exposure to pollution? Absolutely. Right. And part of that, right, is simply, right, getting folks, right, out of their cars, right, and onto the path, right? So we have that emissions reduction, right? Also, air quality monitors, right, is another one, and ideally a lush vegetative buffer. Specifically, how far is EB Mud? I mean, Brian, I'm pretty sure you could throw some stones from West Oakland Link to the wastewater treatment facility. You and I can try it once it's built, but it's right there.
Well, please don't. I think it's
Oh,
about
and this is
2,000 feet.
recorded. I will not throw anything at EB Mud since this is recorded. Yeah, but it's very close, Brian, and it is stinky, and yeah, it's stinky. Are the facilities being moved soon? So CWS and CAS are scheduled to move, I believe, in the next 2 years, and we'll see if they actually do that and whether or not the city of Oakland forces them to relocate.
I would just say with that, the California Waste Solutions, they are actually moving into the Port of Oakland area and actually closer to the path itself. So they're moving to the other side of Grand Avenue.
What would make them relocate? Either a lawsuit or community pressure, or the city of Oakland actually enforcing.
Well, I would just say that the CWS, they're moving to their location so they can kind of move out of West Oakland neighborhood itself. And we do think where they will be located, just the way the prevailing winds work, there should be less exposure. But yes, it is closer to the path, and that's something we're aware of and thinking and considering.
Mm-hmm. And WOB has worked for years, along with other community members, to get CWS out of the neighborhood. So that is a win for the community.
maybe we should go on to the next one, Nicole, I think.
All right. Hi. I just want to start off by thanking everyone for sharing your time and your voices. We really do want to integrate everyone's collective intentions. And so since we've gone over the structure within the project, we're going to start looking at the ground and specifically the touchdowns and where the project starts touching the landscape. And so you can see on this graphic here, these are all the on and off ramps, or what I'm also calling touchdowns. And they all land in very different places in different neighborhoods. Next slide. So based on all of the previous meetings, we heard a lot of great content, and we heard that certain amenities should actually be copied and pulled throughout the whole project. So we think that all these places highlighted in green should have they should share some of these elements, and they should have a similar character, so you know that you're kind of pulled through the link and that you're on the link, and you can tell because there's all of these similar amenities. And so maps were a big one. All of these touchdowns, it's helpful to know when you're getting on or off where you're headed. Rest areas or a place to sit. AQI data, some sort of signage that lets you know how the air quality is before you board. And then planting. It's some type of planting that shows you this is where people should be, and like you're welcome to be here. And so on the next slide, we're gonna dive into planting for a little bit. I want to show on this wheel plant criteria. And at a landscape firm like this, we take a long time to think about all these different aspects. But on this project, we're specifically really going to look hard at views and safety, salt tolerance, and maintenance. Because you can see on the right where the Bay Bridge, all these palm trees that we now identify with this bridge, those were selected because they can endure salt spray. And although a lot of people, myself included, as someone who's lived in Oakland for a long time, when we think of Oakland, we think of oak trees, but oak trees just won't survive in a lot of parts of our project. And so this is an example of comparing just two tree species. And I'm not saying these are the ones we're going with. I just want to give an example of like how strong and beautiful an oak tree can be and what it means to a lot of people and how they actually help purify the air. They also are great for native insects and animals, but on certain parts of our trail, an oak tree won't survive. And also it having a broad canopy means you can't see cars or different people at certain elevations. So that means it's hard to see, which also means it's a little less safe. They also require a lot of space, and our project kind of gets wider and narrower at different points. So an oak tree won't be able to fit in parts of our project, whereas the Canary Island date palm is already used on the bridge, which our trail connects to. So there's sort of this continued plant palette. They're salt tolerant. They're really tall and skinny, so they allow for great visibility when you're walking or biking or moving with your family through the path. And they also do really well in small spaces, and they're super easy to maintain. Whereas there are some major cons, which is that they don't clean the air, and they're not really a symbol of Oakland. They're also expensive. So these are kind of the criteria that we look at when we're kind of developing our plant palette and when we're thinking about for this project. And so next slide. So we want to sort of do that in general, and we're going to dive into the different locations along the trail and show you what we heard from previous meetings of requests for different parts along the trail. And then we're going to discuss with you all if there's anything we're missing. So we're going to start at this touchdown, the connection point with the Bay Trail, which Deshadra already went over amenities on the trail itself in pink. And we're talking about all of the amenities in green that are on the ground plane. So we heard that signage, strong lighting, a place to rest, and planting would be really important here. But there's also a lot of little comments below just grasping at different voices of an urban forest and digital display counter. So the things in blue are what lots and lots of people requested, but I don't want to exclude smaller other voices as well. So we can go to the next slide. So this is sort of a perspective or layering in what it could look like here at this touchdown, where we actually have a lot of space on the ground. So we're able to plant trees here, which is really exciting. And we can have places for people to take a break or lock up a bike or look at a map before deciding which path they want to go on, if they want to bike towards Emeryville or get up on the West Oakland link. We're also imagining, as you can see on the images on the right, that this trail should come and land in planting, so people know that this is a place for them and that it's a public space. Next slide. The next on the trail, which is going east towards Maritime, this spot is a little bit smaller on the ground plane, but people were saying that they would find it really helpful if there was signage for wayfinding and that if there's an AQI reader here. Next slide. And so you can see how the path lands on this corner, and it's really important to help have maps or wayfinding here so people can know how to integrate safely into the intersection. And we also people were asking about water or food, and because across the street there's going to be an OMS station, people will eventually be able to get water and food right across the street. So we're trying to keep that in mind. OMSS, thanks, Nicole. We're trying to keep that in mind as we're stitching into a neighborhood. And so we're going to move amenities around that reflect what's going to be available nearby. Next slide. So this is the frontage loop. And talking about the ground plane, we think that people are going to be moving in and under and around freeways here, and that by cleaning up and adding a nice setting of planting will really help make this feel like an attraction. We also think that you're biking through columns of the freeway and that those make a great canvas for public art. Next slide. So here's a slight perspective showing that. And we're thinking that trees and planting will be great markers as wayfinding along the trail. And that lighting will be really critical as you move underneath these spaces. So here's an example as you go from the frontage loop to the Wood Street Tunnel. Sorry if it's a little confusing, but this is the one underpass you'd be going under that connects you to West Grand Alley. And this is just demonstrating how adding lighting and murals or planting on the walls, we're showing sort of two types here, as well as safe bike trails will help guide people through the space and let them know that it's a safe place to enter. And you can see some examples on the right of really adding a lot of lighting, string lights, pole lights, to really make sure there are clear sight lines and that people feel safe and seen here. So you can see on the left there's an arrow that we were just looking at the Wood Street underpass and how it's a great canvas for public art. And then we'd be coming along. This is called West Grand Alley, the lower path there. And people in previous meetings had said that safety is really key here. It's sort of like a canyon, so we need a lot of street lighting, but you're also near a lot of places where people currently take lunch for different taco trucks, and there's new developments coming in. So places for gathering or lunch areas would also be beneficial here. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see how this sort of pull-out space or spillover space with benches, trash cans, signage, and lighting can work with the split levels of the bike paths coming through. And on the right, you can see a precedent of how adding some really, a character of pole lights and having string lights can really create kind of an outdoor room and give it an identity that could help make people feel like they want to hang out there or move through the space. And here's a section showing how the West Grand Alley is below, and then there's the upper bike path above on West Grand. And last but not least, this is the other part of the trailhead that, like Sarah was talking about. There's sort of the bookends of the link, and this is where the path meets Mandela. And so because this is sort of like the welcome mat of the link, wayfinding, signage, interpretation, water fountains, and public art will all really help put this place on the map and welcome and guide people. And that was a lot of what people were asking for, is a really beautiful, welcoming entry place that people could come and start their travels. And here are some examples of different signage and maps and monumental art that helps in urban places, helps people figure out where they're liking to go or where they want to head. And so that is a lot of place ideas to move through, but here's sort of a recap of these different points along the trail. They all have very different characteristics, but we want to hear from you, and not just what people had said in other meetings, what you think is really important to have here. And I know planting has come up earlier, but feel free to get your opinions out there. And I think it's going to be a continued discussion as we really dive into the design in our next phases.
Thanks, Gio.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to read a couple of things from the chat. Will there be
Great.
bike tool repair stations anywhere along the link?
Yeah, and this is something we definitely want to include. Just the biggest problem that these have had is that the ones that have been installed around the Bay Area, they don't last for very long. You know, unfortunately, the tools kind of either get snipped off or different things happen to them. So we definitely want to try and figure out a way to make this work, especially because this is part of a much longer trail that we're going to build, you know, first all the way to Treasure Island and then, you know, eventually to San Francisco. And so there does need to be that capacity to kind of fix your bike if it happens. So it's definitely something we're looking at. And thank you, Bill. That'll be awesome that you'll have them at the OMSS facility. But just the biggest challenge with this that we need to figure out is how to actually make it so they last longer than a month or so, which is I think what most of them have lasted that I've seen.
Yeah, and Bill, again, grateful that OMSS will have those amenities, right? In addition to, I mean, just being an actual place where people can exit West Oakland Link, right? Since it'll be a 24-hour full stop shop, right? So folks are able to exit right there on Maritime, right? Access the restroom, get a snack, get water. So we're grateful that that's happening. Let's see. Joshua said, "What is OMSS?" Bill, do you care to tell everyone what OMSS is, or I can give my version of it?
I think Gavin or Nicole, you would do a much better job than I would. Thanks, though.
Oh, well, just, yeah,
I
Bill's
was asking Bill, yeah, since he's on the call.
I
Yeah, to
misheard you.
see.
That makes way more sense.
Hi, Bill Abudi with OMSS, Oakland Maritime Support Services. We're actually a community project to get the trucks out of the community near the port. Most of the truckers serving the port have no place to park their trucks or get any services. So this was mandated onto the city with the help of the community to dedicate 15 acres of truck parking and amenities. And that's what we're building. I put a few slides in just to give you an idea. From our mini mart will be a Circle K, open 24/7. We'll have a gas station. We'll have EV charging for cars. And also on the other side of it, just like a travel plaza, we'll have it for trucks. We'll have fast DC charging and level 2 charging. The rest of the site will be primarily truck parking, trailer parking. We'll have repair shops. We do plan to build in the future a food court that will have a lot of services to it, and eventually we'll have a full bike rental and bike repair shop that we'll lease out to somebody that would take care of it. We are on the bike path, And so we want to be a good neighbor. And so you'll see in a lot of our designs from the pictures that I gave you, even though that the bike trail can't put trees on itself, we will have a lot of greenery. We love greenery, and we'll be planting a lot of trees on the side of the bike path. And you'll see it throughout our site. But think of it as a travel plaza, but it's really concentrated for the port truckers. In 2003, there was a report that came out of the community that suggested that truckers should move out of the neighborhoods and how it could be done. And that's what we're doing here.
Thanks, Bill. Really excited.
Yeah, and I just want to say we really appreciate Bill has been working really closely with us on this, you know, and obviously we're going to fly over their facilities, but we really appreciate the fact that there will be a shop here, and you know that is an amenity that, you know, the next time you'll get to something like that will be Treasure Island. So I think that's really important.
All right. Did we just feedback? Did we get things in the right places? This is an iteration, right? This is a draft, right? What's missing? What's too much? Christopher, I see a thumbs up. That's great.
I also wanted to just take a second and answer a question or a comment from Brian about, is there a way to integrate the new housing at Wood and Grand into themes and amenities of the alley? I think that's a great question, and it's a coincidence, but our office is actually the landscape architect for that project. And so some of my colleagues have worked on that. And I do think, as well as Sarah, who spoke earlier in the meeting. So yeah, we're tracking what's going on there and how these will tie in as well. And ideally, they will speak to each other and really help each other out and activate the space. I know right now it seems like a hard, almost like a hard sell, or hard to be convinced that West Grand Alley could be very activated, but I do think with things that are in the works that it really could be a space that will have a lot of people, and having a lot of people, that's what really makes a safe space, and making sure that people want to be there. So that's our big intention and our effort going forward in this area. But to bring it back to what Nicole said, if you're like, I want more picnic tables and benches, or if there's certain desires, or if there's too much of something you're seeing, let us know and we'll try and incorporate that.
Let's see, Brian had another question. Can the trail use green walls of vines to protect against graffiti and add greenery for air quality? And just borrow irrigated water or borrow recycled water from EB Mud, since it's, you know, right next door.
I think that's a great question, and there's different types of green walls. There's walls that have vines that like ivy or creeping fig that are vining walls, and then there's other green walls that you see that are heavily maintained, that have a lot of different species and irrigation running through the whole wall. Those are really expensive, and there's a reason why you don't see them outside as much as inside certain like offices. But I believe that this project could definitely handle creating a wall to make it feel safe, rather than right now it's kind of a partial wall in this area. But yeah, extending a wall and have vining, and that would make it less graffiti or less welcoming to graffiti. It wouldn't be doing as much in the spirit of cleaning the air, but it would be creating a nice space. So there's trade-offs. This just as easily could be a wall with a mural or kind of historical references, or, you know, this wall could be a lot of different things.
Nicole, can I raise my hand?
Oh, yes. Go for it, Brian.
Hi, everyone. That was me, Brian. There's a different Brian on here too. We've done some significant work, and you may already know all this stuff I'm going to tell you, but we've done some significant work on appropriate plants for the reasonably high salinity recycled water that's available from mud. Particularly vines that can be used in green wall spaces. And there's a couple benefits, not only green space, and you know, maybe it doesn't clean the air as much as other things, but it also is a sound issue because it softens the sound coming off a concrete wall. It provides a sense of humanness and green space, like you're in a place, you're not just in an industrial zone. So there are a variety of benefits. I know it feels, you know, troublesome to get water out along this trail. But it feels like for specific types of plantings, we might be able to accomplish this on a project of this scale. And I don't think the goal is, you know, oh, this will clean the air. It will help, but it's also a psychological benefit as we walk along. And it is a big maintenance cost reduction if people are not you know, inspired to spray paint on some concrete pillar somewhere. So I think there has been quite a bit of research on what kind of plants, what kinds of vines can work. And I agree with you. I think I'm not an expert, but some grow slower than others, some grow faster and go all over the place. But I just think it's worth taking a look at, because it might be, even if it's in occasional sections, it might be a really great value proposition. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those are all really, really great points. And we definitely, I think, want a lot of the things that plants can bring to a space.
And I would just say, add to that, Brian, too, is also they can help cool in the summertime, right? So green walls, if you're walking beside it, I think they can help lower the temperature. And also, Nia, I appreciate I checked out the solar picnic tables. I didn't know those exist. I didn't know solar panels could kind of produce that much power. So definitely something we can look at there.
And if you have further comments, please make sure to just add them in the chat or into the survey. But we have one more item that Gavin's going to go over before we close today.
Can I quickly make a note that about CWS? So I forgot to mention this key point about their relocation. Their facilities will be completely indoors. So I just wanted to name that is another win for the community. So they are relocating. They will be closer to the West Oakland link, but their facilities, right, and their recycling will all be indoors.
And just if we stay on this map here, you could kind of imagine it. It's above where you see 4, that big plot of land. Yeah, up there, that whole thing will be the CWS facility. And, you know, even though it's coming close to the path, we're really excited that it's coming out of the neighborhood. So that's the
Absolutely.
win there. And so, you know, there's always trade-offs to these type of things. Great. So, you know, one thing we did want to specifically bring up here and just kind of get feedback on is kind of the future phasing of this project and what's being built. So I know in previous meetings we've talked very much about that there is a project coming before the West Oakland link, and it's a kind of a temporary path. We're taking the opportunity of there was a project already that was planning on putting a bus lane on Grand. And as they were doing outreach to the community to put that bus lane in, the community, we heard a lot of people saying, you know, well, what about a bike connection? There still isn't that bike connection. And this was before I think we knew that, you know, the West Oakland link was very much stalled at this time. And so they were able to add a 8-foot kind of temporary, it doesn't quite, you know, meet all the standards in terms of that you would want to have for the bike path, but they're able to make it fit 8 feet wide, and which is, you know, really wide enough for a lot of trips that will go on the existing Grand Avenue structure. So you can see it here. It's the green pathway that runs to the south of Grand. It's going to start at Campbell. There will be kind of a connection and the turning lane from Mandela to, or sorry, from Grand to Mandela will become a 2-way bike path. And then it will come up onto the Grand Avenue structure, and it will continue on the structure itself until it reaches frontage road. Another thing, you know, reason why this is temporary, because it doesn't meet the grades that we need for ADA compliance and stuff, but it is a temporary solution. Once it gets to frontage road, it will cross frontage road and then run alongside Grand Avenue all the way down to Maritime Street. And so, you know, it's really kind of pinching the road here, and there, you know, but it's going to bring a path, and so we hope that this gets to construction next year, and it's a very quick construction work because it's all kind of just you know, painting pavement and very basic work. So we expect this to be completed next year, which will give everyone in West Oakland the opportunity and the chance at that point to be able to make it over to Maritime Street and then out to the Bay Trail and you know, the eastbound path out to Wiba Buena Island. So when you look at the top, the big benefit that this is doing is it's bringing the bus lane out there. And so if you look at the top diagram, you know, this adds 2,200 feet of bus HOV lane, and this is going to reduce the peak hour bus HOV travel times by 18 minutes. And when we say peak hour, that basically just means, you know, those few times a week, you know, Monday through Friday, maybe now it's more of a Tuesday through Thursday, where, you know, the morning traffic, there's that congestion. This will reduce the travel times for people in that kind of heavy congestion by up to 18 minutes. And so this is if really it's the worst congestion there is, and it's backed up all the way towards frontage road. So in both of the situations, we are looking at adding a next phase future bridge over the railroad tracks, because we think that's important. But the West Oakland link is going to come in, and we're going to kind of take away most of that temporary path, and we're going to build a permanent structure. And so for most of the West Oakland link, it's going to be 15 feet wide. It's not quite 15 feet wide where you come up to frontage. It's only 10 feet because we have the other ramp that will also be 10 feet, and there'll be the stairs. So there's, you know, kind of in total 20 feet of kind of space for people and cyclists coming up on those sides, plus the stairway. So there's a bunch of other ways. And then on the other side of the railroad tracks, there's this 15-foot path. Now we have kind of two options that we can do for this project, for our project. We're not going to be able to build the rail bridge right away. It's going to take much longer because dealing with the railroads, but also there's an additional cost that we haven't figured out where we're going to find the funds for. So there's two ways to kind of build out this path, and we wanted to see if anyone had feedback on both of these. The first would be we would just build kind of the structures part of the West Oakland link with kind of the 20 feet of path feeding up to the railways. And then we would leave the existing 8-foot wide Bay Bridge, you know, forward path, the one that's going to be installed hopefully next year, until you go over the railroad tracks and you'd come back out to the 15-foot path. The other option that we're looking at is there is a way to fit the path onto the existing Grand Avenue structure. The problem is it will shorten the bus lane. So we could fit a 15-foot wide path onto there, but it means that the bus lane, and sorry, the typo there, it would be 1,700 feet, not 17,000 feet. That would go somewhere in Fruitvale, I think. But it would be a 1,700 feet bus HOV lane. So it would be about 500 feet shorter. And this does mean that during those peak times, you know, in the week of people going into the city on the bridge, you know, they would only experience a travel time reduction of 16.5 minutes instead of the full 18-minute reduction from the full project. And so you know, these are the kind of two options we're working with, and we wanted to see if there was kind of feedback or comments on them. You know, so basically it is this, you would, in the scenario at the top, you would have, you know, still all of the West Oakland Link paths, but you'd have a 500-foot longer bus lane, and then you would have about 500 feet over the railway where the path narrows to 8 feet, versus the one below, which is, you know, the bus lane would have to be shortened by 500 feet. There'd be a little less time savings, but it would offer a full 15-foot path. So we want to kind of see if there's any. And this is, I mean, it is a temporary solution based on us finding the funding and you know, so that is a big challenge. It is a very expensive bridge that would have to go there because it's over the railways, and it would have to, I think, literally be 300+ feet long, the structure itself. So it is it would be a very expensive solution. You know, but I think no matter what, we do want to move in that direction, because we do like the idea the bridge could also offer that separation from the roadway itself, which could allow air to flow up, a little less air pollution. And so there's a lot of other, you know, sound. So there is a lot of other benefits to the bridge. So feel free to kind of leave us comments, you know, in the chat, email us, put it in the survey, anything, you know, if you do want to comment on this, we are kind of looking for feedback on it. But yeah, you know, anyway, any feedback is really helpful. And, you know, it's a lot of technical information to kind of get there. So, you know, also happy to explain it in more detail if people need that. So I guess this is kind of at the end of the movie, or at the end of the the meeting. So I would just say, I mean, I think, you know, we're here to answer questions. If there's other questions, things that weren't covered, general question about the project, I think this is a great time for that. And please fill out the survey. That's really how we, you know, we take all the chat information, we take every other way, but we do want that survey too, you know, it really helps. And even if you said it before or someone else has said it, feel free to say it again, because it, you know, the more we see the, you know, something the community wants, the more likely we are to be able to integrate it.
Ryan said he's ready to join the crew. When will we start building? Is his question.
Yes. Okay. So like I said, there is this temporary path that is going to come in. We really hope this will happen next year. So by this time next year, we do expect that you will be able to kind of travel over. In terms of the West Oakland Link itself, the plan is to start construction at end of 2025, beginning of 2026, and be finished early 2028. I would say the one nice thing about the way we are doing the loop ramps and that kind of thing is that it will allow us to phase it in a way that will make sure there's not too much disruption. So you'll get that original, you know, that initial 8-foot path. We're probably going to be able to phase construction in a way that allows you to keep the path there, even as we, you know, build most of the other sections. So there will be minimal disruptions. Yes, we, you know, there's a lot of, with federal funds and all of that, it's also the right thing to do, but we definitely, you know, local and union labor.
There's a question about, let's see, where to go. About Gilman. Do we know how much the Gilman Street pedestrian overpass to the sports field cost? Any familiarity with that one, Gavin?
I know the total project cost, but it's I think it was 80 million for that project. But that's not that's the whole rebuild, I believe. I don't think that's just the bike path over. I don't actually know the just the bike path over cost. Although I have looked at it actually to try and find the comparable cost, to be honest. Yeah. That's why I know it's $80 million. So.
Our next event will be on November 19th at the West Oakland Farmers Market. For those of you who, you know, are around and free, come out and chat with us. and support local businesses at the same time.
And
And
I'd
that's a
say,
Sunday.
and we'll have kind of maps out so you can kind of put your feedback directly on a map, which I think is really helpful. So yeah, really excited for that.
All right, I'm gonna bid everyone adieu, and we'll see you for our next meeting in February 2024. Safe holidays to everyone. And as always, thank you for being here.